In the winter of 1878, in a logging camp on the Muskegon River in Michigan, 41 men sat down to the best meat they had eaten since October. A black bear had come sniffing around the camp's meat shed in the last warm week of November, and one of the sawyers put a ball through its lungs from 20 paces. It was a gift. 400 pounds of gift. The camp cook, a Quebec man they called Old Batiste, broke that bear down on a plank table by lantern light, salted the shoulders and the hams heavy in a wooden box, and hung the rest in the little smoke shack behind the bunkhouse where hickory and green oak smoldered day and night. The meat came out of that smoke the color of a saddle, dark, sweet-smelling, hard on the outside like it had been varnished. Come January, when the pea soup got thin and the salt cod ran low, Batiste took down a haunch and cut it into slabs thick as a man's thumb and laid them in a big spider skillet over the fire. The grease hissed. The edges went brown and crisp and curled at the corners. 41 men ate off tin plates with the wind screaming through the pines and the pitch popping in the stove, and they laughed and they went to their bunks with their bellies full for the first time in a month. 2 days later, men started running for the snow with their guts twisted. That passed. They called it the camp trots and made jokes about Batiste's cooking. Then, about 12 days after that supper, the real thing came. Fevers that climbed and would not break. Faces swelling until the eyes shut to slits. And the pain, friend. Pain in the arms, the thighs, the jaw, the muscles behind the ribs, so that a grown man who could swing a felling axe all day could not lift a cup of water to his own mouth. Men lay in those bunks and cried out when the cook's boy so much as bumped the frame. 16 of them were dead by the thaw. The camp foreman wrote it up the way a foreman would. He wrote that the bear was diseased. He wrote that the bear had been a sick animal, gone strange, and that its flesh carried a poison. Some of the men said it was the swamp water. The doctor from Big Rapids could not get through the drifts for 11 days, and when he finally did, he wrote fever of unknown origin and went home. And for 2 generations after, that camp was remembered as the place where a bear killed 16 loggers from beyond the grave. The bear did not kill those men. The bear was already dead, hanging in salt and smoke like 10,000 hogs hung that same winter across this country. What killed them was a sentence. A folk belief passed hand to hand from Maine to the Ozarks, said with total confidence by good men who loved their families and would have died before they poisoned them. And they said it like this: if it is salty, if it is smoky, if it is brown on the outside, it is safe. That is the survival myth, and it has killed more men on this continent than every bear that ever walked it. I am not going to tell you yet how it worked. I am going to teach you the skill first, because you cannot understand the hole in the floor until you have walked the whole house. The skill has a proper name, and your great-great-grandfather did not think of it as a skill any more than you think of driving to work as a skill. He called it putting up the hog, killing and curing, salt pork and country ham and side meat and shoulder bacon. 1 hog killed in December, and by the time the dogwoods bloomed, that family had eaten protein every single day out of a box of salt, a wooden barrel, a plank loft, and a shed full of slow smoke. No electricity, no refrigeration, no store. 200 pounds of meat kept sound for 6 months and more by a man with a knife and a woman with her sleeves rolled. I am going to give you all of it, every piece, every ratio, every temperature, every timing, the way it is written in my grandfather's hand. Every piece except one, and that one is the piece that killed those loggers. And we will get there. Stay with me by choice, friend. Not because a machine put this in front of you, because this is worth the 20 minutes of your life. Let me ask you something plain first. If the power went out in your county tomorrow and stayed out for a month, could you keep 40 pounds of meat from rotting? Not freeze it, not stuff it in a cooler and pray. Keep it, sound, edible, safe, into the 2nd month, without a plug in a wall. Most grown men in this country could not. They could not begin. They would lose the contents of a freezer in 72 hours and stand in the driveway watching it drip. And their great-grandfathers could have done the whole business in their sleep, half drunk, in a blizzard, with a hog on a gambrel and the water heating in a kettle. That is not a small thing that got lost, neighbor. That is sovereignty. That is the difference between a household and a customer. And today we are taking a piece of it back. My name is Caleb Wren. I am the 7th generation of my people on the same Appalachian Ridge, and my family has held that ground since the 1790s. My daddy died when I was small, and I was raised up by my grandfather, Amos Wren, who was born in a house with no wire running to it and who butchered hogs on that ridge for 61 straight Decembers. When Amos got sick, he made me sit at his kitchen table with a leather journal and a pencil, and he made me write down everything he knew in his words and read it back to him until he was satisfied I had it right. I promised him I would not let it die with me. This channel is me keeping that promise. And here is the thing that makes me quietly angry, friend, and I will not pretend otherwise. This skill did not disappear because it stopped working. It works right now, today, exactly as well as it worked in 1840. It disappeared because a handful of Chicago packing houses, a refrigerated rail car, and a marketing board in the 1920s made an enormous fortune the day your family forgot they could do it themselves. Nobody burned the smokehouses. They just made sure there was no dollar in you knowing, and considerable dollars in you paying somebody else. By the end of this story, you are going to know the entire method, start to finish, and you are going to know the one step in it that industry worked hardest to make you forget, because that one step is the only step that ever stood between a hungry man and 16 graves. Before we get into the meat of it, pull the trigger on subscribe. Not for me. I have got a ridge and a woodpile, and I am fine. Do it because the buried skills we drag back into daylight around here, you are going to want the next one, and there is no sense finding this place twice. Now, the old method has 6 pieces. 6 in order, no substitutions. The cold, the salt, the smoke, the hang, the trier, and the heat. Miss any one of the first 5 and you lose the meat. You will smell it before you see it, and it will be a sour, hopeless, money-in-the-mud kind of smell. But miss the 6th one, neighbor, and you do not lose the meat. You lose the man. You lose the wife who ate second. You lose the child who got the tender slice off the middle because she was smallest and everybody loved her. Most beginners get the first 4 right, more or less, on their 2nd or 3rd try. The 5th, they fumble. The 6th has been quietly stripped out of the talk for 100 years, so completely stripped that I have sat at tables with men in their 80s, good men, careful men, who had never once heard it said out loud. So the real question is not what we forgot, friend. It is who cashed the check when we forgot it. Piece 1. The cold. Picture a ridge farm on the 14th of December, before light. There is frost standing in the hoofprints like little glass rims, and the water in the trough has an inch of gray ice on it. My grandfather is standing in the barn lot in a canvas coat with his breath going up in a column, and he is not looking at the hog. He is looking at the sky, and he is holding his hand up flat, and he is feeling for wind out of the northwest. He says one word: tomorrow. Here is why that morning mattered more than the knife did. Hog-killing weather is not tradition, it is refrigeration. Your ancestors needed the outside world to do the job a compressor does now, and that meant the temperature had to sit between about 28 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit, day and night, for several days running. Not a cold snap in the afternoon that lets go at midnight. Sustained. Below 40, so bacteria crawl instead of run. Above about 28, so the meat does not freeze solid before the salt can get into it, because frozen meat will not take a cure. And a ham that freezes in the box in week 1 comes out spoiled in week 3. Then comes the part nobody talks about anymore, and it is the whole of piece 1, getting the animal heat out. A hog carries a body temperature near 102 degrees Fahrenheit, and there are 80 or 90 pounds of insulating fat and muscle holding that heat in the deep part of the hams and along the bone. So you bleed the animal out fast and complete, hanging head down, because blood left in the tissue is where rot starts first. You dress it out, split it, and you spread that carcass open on a gambrel in the cold air overnight, 12 to 24 hours, until the meat is chilled through to the bone. Not cool, not cold to your hand, chilled to below 40 degrees Fahrenheit clean through, and the fat gone firm and waxy so that when you draw a knife through the shoulder, the fat squeaks instead of smears. Cold air, solid hog, full bleed, overnight chill. Then the knife, every time. That is not my folklore. Go and find the United States Department of Agriculture Farmers Bulletin, numbered 913, Killing Hogs and Curing Pork, printed for farm families around 1918, or the older one, number 183, Meat on the Farm. The federal government put it in plain print for the price of a stamp. Chill the carcass thoroughly before cutting. Do not cure warm meat. That is the government of the United States confirming, in ink, what my grandfather knew by holding his palm up to a December sky. The number one botch on this step is impatience, and I know because I am the one who botched it. I was 11 years old. It was an odd, soft November, 55 degrees and drizzling, and I had been promised the hog for weeks, and I could not stand to wait. I begged him. I told him it felt cold to me. He let me have my way, which was his particular cruelty and his particular kindness, and we killed that hog in the wet warm, and we cut it that same evening because I was too proud to admit the fat was smearing on the blade. 10 days later, the shoulder in the salt box had a smell coming off the bone that I can still call up on command, 40 years later. Sour, sweetish, wrong. He made me carry it to the woods myself, both arms, and he made me bury it deep. He did not yell at me. He never once yelled. He said, "Now you know. That is a whole hog's worth of winter groceries in a hole in the ground, friend, over 4 days of patience I did not have." This week's homework is nothing, truly nothing. Get yourself a cheap outdoor thermometer, $5 or $6, hang it on the north side of your house out of the sun, and start writing down the low and the high every day in a notebook. Do that through one winter, and you will know your own land's curing window better than any almanac can tell you. That is the entry ticket, and it costs $6. Because the cold only holds the meat still, it does not preserve 1 ounce of it. The next piece is the one that does the actual preserving, and it is the piece where the money came in, where a mineral your ancestors fought wars over turned into a product with a brand name and a patent and a markup, and where 9 out of 10 beginners today use exactly the wrong kind and wonder why their bacon turned gray and slick. It is not the mistake you would guess. That is next. Piece 2. The salt. Picture a springhouse room with a stone floor, 40 degrees and still, and a wooden box big as a coffin with legs on it, tilted slightly so liquid can run out the low end into a bucket. My great-grandmother stands over that box with her forearms coated white to the elbow, and she is not sprinkling. She is packing. She takes a ham and she works that mixture into the hock end and around the bone with her thumbs, like she is trying to press it clear through to the other side, because she knows exactly where a ham goes bad first, and it is not the outside. It is at the bone. Here is the method, and I want you to hear the numbers. The Old Farm Dry Cure, straight out of those federal bulletins and out of my grandfather's journal, runs about 8 pounds of coarse salt, 2 pounds of brown sugar, and 2 ounces of saltpeter for every 100 pounds of meat. Salt must be plain, coarse salt, non-iodized, no anti-caking additives, what they sell today as canning salt or pickling salt. Iodized table salt will off-flavor your meat and can darken it. The sugar is not for sweetness, it is to soften the harshness of the salt and feed the good fermentation on the surface. And that third ingredient, that is where you need to be a grown-up with me for a minute. Saltpeter in the old bulletins was potassium nitrate. What the modern world uses, and what every food scientist and every extension service will tell you to use, is a measured curing salt containing sodium nitrite, sold as curing salt number 1 or by trade names, and the dose is 1 level teaspoon per 5 pounds of meat. Not a pinch, not by eye, measured, and mixed evenly through your salt and sugar, and never doubled for luck. That nitrite is doing 2 jobs. It is giving you the rose color and the ham flavor, and far more importantly, it is standing guard against Clostridium botulinum, which is the organism that produces botulism toxin, and which loves exactly the conditions a low-oxygen smoked cure creates. I am not your food inspector, friend, and I will not stand here and tell you to guess at chemistry with your children's supper. Buy the measured product. It costs about $8 and it lasts years. Better a measured teaspoon than a hospital bill. Now the timing, which is the part people ruin. Salt does not move fast. Reckon on 7 days per inch of thickness for a slab of bacon, and for a whole ham reckon 2 to 2.5 days per pound. So an 18-pound ham is looking at somewhere between 40 and 45 days in the salt, and every day of it must be held between 36 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit. You rub, you pack, you lay them skin side down, you overhaul them, which means unstack them and re-rub and restack them at about day 7 and again at day 14.
Then, after the salt time is up, you rinse the surface and you let that ham hang 2 more weeks for what is called equalization,
Which is simply the salt walking inward until it is even from rind to bone. Cold room. Clean salt. Measured cure. Bone first. Days per pound. Then rinse and rest. Now here is the part that ought to make you sit up. That mineral, the cheapest and most abundant preservative on God's earth, is a thing your government has taxed, licensed, and monopolized at various points for 400 years because whoever controls salt controls whether a family can put food away. And in the 1880s, the big Chicago packing houses figured out something better than taxing it. They figured out how to make the whole business feel dangerous and technical. They hired chemists. They ran cures in tanks with pumps and needles, and they put a paper label on it that said "inspected," and a farm ham in a wooden box in a spring house suddenly looked like a gamble, and a packing house ham looked like science. Not a conspiracy, neighbor. Just how markets work. Nobody outlawed your salt box. They just made sure there was no dollar in you knowing and considerable dollars in you paying somebody else. And the modern version of the same trick is sitting in the catalogs right now. There is a countertop curing chamber sold for anywhere from $700 to $1,000, humidity controlled, with a phone application so you can watch a number on a screen while your bacon does what bacon has done since Rome. Your great-grandmother's version was a wooden box on a stone floor and a bucket underneath to catch the drip, and it produced better bacon than money can buy for the cost of the lumber. And if that chamber is already on your counter, friend, that is not on you. They are very good at selling. Most people are. The number one botch on this step is not enough salt on the bone. Beginners salt the pretty outside of a ham like they are seasoning a steak and leave the hock end and the joint bare, and the cure never reaches the deep tissue, and 40 days later that ham is beautiful on the outside and ruined at the bone. There is even an old name for it, bone sour. When you find it with your nose, and it is not a smell you argue with. Your homework this week is $5. Buy 5 pounds of coarse, non-iodized canning salt and set it on a shelf in your pantry. That is all. That is the entry ticket to every preservation skill in this whole tradition, and there is not a household in America that should be without it. Because salt alone will get you salt pork in a barrel, and salt pork will keep a year, but it will not get you ham. What turns preserved meat into food a man is glad to see is the third piece. And the third piece is the single most misunderstood step in American cooking. So misunderstood that most people today believe it does something it has never once done in the history of the world. That is next. Piece 3. The smoke. Picture a little building the size of an outhouse, made of chestnut boards gone black on the inside, with a dirt floor and a fire pit dug in the middle of it. It is late January. There is snow on the shingles and a thin gray-blue rope of smoke coming out the gaps at the eaves, so slow you would think the fire had died. Inside, 11 pieces of meat hang from sourwood sticks, and the air is cool enough that you can stand in there in your shirt sleeves and shiver. That is the thing to understand. The smokehouse was cold. What you want is cold smoke. And cold smoke means keeping the smoke chamber under about 90 degrees Fahrenheit and preferably down between 70 and 85. You are not cooking. You are laying down a coat. Smoke carries phenols and formaldehyde compounds that inhibit surface mold and bacteria. It dries and tightens the outer rind into a kind of leather that insects and air cannot easily get through, and it puts on that flavor that makes a plain, salted haunch into something worth walking out in the snow for. You burn hardwood, and you burn it slow, smoldering, mostly sawdust and chips and green chunks laid on a small coal bed. Hickory, oak, apple, maple, corn cobs, which was the poor man's smoke across the whole Midwest and is finer than its reputation. You never burn pine, spruce, cedar, or any resinous softwood, because the resin lays a bitter black soot on the meat and there is nothing to do about it after. You give a cured ham anywhere from 2 days to 2 weeks of intermittent smoke. letting the fire go out overnight and starting it again in the morning until the rind is the color of an old fiddle. Here is the safety line you must not cross, and I want to be blunt. The temperature range from 40 degrees to 140 degrees Fahrenheit is the range where bacteria multiply fastest, and if you hang uncured meat in a warm smokehouse, you have built a bacteria nursery with a nice hickory scent. Cold smoke belongs on cured meat only. Cure first, always. Salt and nitrite first, smoke second. Never the other way, never a shortcut. Cool smoke, hardwood only. Cured meat first. Slow fire, days, not hours. Color like a fiddle. And the extension services will back every word of this. The land-grant universities across the South, in Virginia, in Kentucky, in Tennessee, and Georgia, still publish country ham guidance for farm families, and they will tell you the same thing in the same order with the same temperatures. That is not folklore, friend. That is a university confirming what a man in a canvas coat did by feel in a shed with a dirt floor. Now, the year to circle is 1883. That is the year Germany banned the importation of American pork, and then France, and then others followed, and the reason they gave was that American pork carried a parasite. The Chicago Packers were losing millions, and so, in 1891, the Congress of the United States passed a Meat Inspection Act built specifically to satisfy foreign buyers, requiring microscopic inspection of export pork. Then came 1906 and the Federal Meat Inspection Act after the whole country read about the packing houses and lost its appetite. Now hear me carefully, because I am not going to lie to you to make a villain. That inspection was needed, and it saved lives. But the second thing it did was hand the big packers a stamp that no farm could ever get. The word inspected became a brand, and within one generation, an American family's own smokehouse ham, which their people had eaten for 200 years, had been quietly reclassified in the public mind as suspect meat. Not a conspiracy, neighbor, just how markets work. The government never told you to tear down your smokehouse. There simply stopped being any dollar in you having one, and there were a great many dollars in the alternative. The number one botch on this step is heat. A beginner builds a fire like he is warming a cabin, drives that chamber up to 120 or 130 degrees, and cooks a shell onto the outside of the ham. That shell case hardens the surface so the interior cannot dry, and you get a ham that looks magnificent, hangs all spring, and is rotten in the middle when you open it in July. And the second botch is worse, and it is a belief rather than an act. It is the belief that smoke sterilizes meat. It does not. It never has. Hold on to that, because it is going to matter more than anything else I tell you today. Homework this week. Go find your smoke wood. Do not buy a thing. Walk your fence lines and your neighbor's storm fall and put up an armload of dry hickory, oak, or apple, split small, stacked dry under cover. Free, and it will outlast the video. Because now the meat is cured and smoked and hanging, and here is where the calendar becomes the enemy. From here forward, it is not bacteria you are fighting. It is flies you cannot see, mold you must learn to read, and a mistake that will make you throw away 5 months of work in the second week of June. That is next. Pattern break, friend. Everything I have given you so far is the easy part. The cold, the salt, the smoke, those are the parts that got written down. Those are the parts in the bulletins and the cookbooks and the county fair pamphlets. A careful man reading nothing but what I have said so far could put up a hog and mostly get away with it. What comes next is where the ground gets soft. The next two pieces are the ones that lived only in a person's hands and a person's nose, that were never really written because they could not be written, that died in a single generation when the last of the old women who knew them died in a nursing home in 1970-something with nobody sitting by the bed with a pencil. And the piece after those is where the myth was born. That is the one where men died for lack of knowing. Piece 4. The hang. Picture an unfinished attic over a kitchen in the first week of April. Warm air coming up through the floorboards, dust in a slant of light, and 11 hams hanging in muslin sacks from wire, each one turned so it does not touch the next. There is a bowl on the floor with black pepper in it and a rag, and my grandmother is up there on her knees in the heat with her hair stuck to her forehead, going ham to ham, feeling each one, holding her ear near it, pressing at the hock with 2 fingers. Aging is where a cured ham becomes a country ham. What is happening in those months is water leaving and enzymes working, and the two together turn something salty into something complex. A properly aged country ham loses 18 to 20% of its green weight during the cure and can go up to 30% or better by the end of aging. That water loss is the whole point. Get the water activity low enough, and bacteria simply cannot function in the tissue anymore, no matter how warm the attic gets. The old rule was to hang from after the smoke until the weather turned hot, and then to keep hanging in the heat on purpose. 90 days is a young ham. 6 months makes a good one. A year makes the kind that a man cuts a slice off of and eats standing up in the pantry without telling anybody. The air must move. The pieces must not touch. Dark is better than light, because light and warmth together will go the fat rancid. And now your enemies. First, the cheese skipper, which is a little fly that lays eggs in the crevices of hanging meat, and when it hatches, you have got maggots working down along the bone. Your ancestors fought it with a heavy coating of black pepper worked into every crack around the hock and the exposed muscle, then a tight muslin or heavy paper bag tied shut, and often a second sack over that. Some of the old-timers also used borax dust, and I will tell you plainly that modern extension guidance does not recommend borax on food, so leave that one in the past and use pepper, tight bags, and a screened room instead. Second enemy, mold. White and green powdery mold on the outside of an aging ham is normal and expected, and the traditional fix is exactly what you would guess. Scrub it off with a stiff brush and a rag with vinegar, or wipe it down with oil when you take it down to cook. Black slimy patches, off odors, or any sourness at the joint are a different animal, and that ham goes in the ground. Air on all sides, pepper the crevices, bag it tight. Dark and dry, months, not weeks. Brush the bloom and read the bone. I botched this one too, and it was the only time I ever heard Amos Wren's sigh. I was 14, and I bagged the hams myself because I had asked to, and I did a fine, tidy job of the bags, and I did not pepper the hock joints because they were greasy and it was hot, and I wanted to go fishing. In late June, he took one down and set it on the table and pressed at the joint, and something moved. He turned it, and we both watched. He did not lecture me. He carried it out himself, and when he came back in, he washed his hands a long time at the basin, and he said, "Now you know why your grandmother's hands smelled like pepper every April." Now here is a villain with a date on it, and this one is close enough to touch. In 1922, a group of packers and livestock men founded the National Livestock and Meat Board, and that organization spent the next 50 years doing what marketing organizations do, which is teaching Americans how to think about meat. And in the same decades, the electric refrigerator and then the home deep freeze came into American kitchens, and General Electric and Frigidaire and their competitors sold that freezer with a specific promise. The promise was that curing was over. No more salt, no more smoke, no more attic. Just put it in the box. And then, after the Second World War, the last leg got knocked out. Small local slaughterhouses, the custom butchers who did the killing for farm families who no longer wanted to do it in the yard, began closing under consolidation and regulation, and the Wholesome Meat Act of 1967 finished a great many of them. The hog got farther away. The building fell down. The knowledge, which only ever lived in hands, had nowhere left to live. Not a conspiracy, neighbor, just how markets work. Nobody came out to the ridge and tore the smokehouse off its footers. They just made sure there was no dollar in you knowing and considerable dollars in you paying somebody else, and time did the rest. The number one botch on the hang is hanging in a modern insulated basement or a plastic tub. No air movement means condensation. Condensation means the outside stays wet, and a wet rind grows exactly the things you have spent 2 months trying to prevent. You want a drafty loft or a screened shed. The old buildings were leaky on purpose. Homework this week. Get 1 yard of unbleached muslin and a spool of jute twine, about $4 total. Sew or tie yourself 1 ham bag, even with no ham to put in it, so your hands know the shape of the thing before the day you need it. Because now the ham is hanging and the months are passing, And here comes the question every one of your ancestors had to answer with no thermometer, no laboratory, and no help. How do you know? How does a man look at a piece of meat that has been hanging in a hot attic since Easter and know whether to feed it to his family or bury it? There was a tool for that. It cost nothing, it was usually made from a bone, and almost nobody alive knows how to use it. That is next. Piece 5. The Trier. Picture a kitchen in September and an old man with a thing in his hand that looks like a knitting needle whittled out of a horse's leg bone, worn slick and honey-colored from 50 years of use. He slides it in beside the hock joint, in along the bone, all the way to the hilt, and he draws it out, and he passes it under his nose one time, slow. Then he wipes it on his trouser leg, and he moves it 2 inches over, and does it again, at 3 places along the length of the ham. Then he either nods or he does not. That is the trier, and it was the entire quality control system of the American farm for 2 centuries. A clean, non-porous sliver of bone or metal, sharpened, pushed in along the bone where spoilage always begins, and red with the nose. A sound ham smells nutty, faintly sweet, meaty, clean. A bad ham smells sour or gassy or like a wet copper penny, and once you have smelled a bone-sour ham, you will never need this description again. You test at the hock, at the middle near the femur, and at the H-bone end, because a ham can be perfect in 2 places and rotten in the 3rd. You also read the outside. A good aged ham is firm, hard, and rings a little dull when you thump it. Soft spots, bulges, and any place where a thumb sinks in are all bad news. Wet or slimy under the mold, bad news. Fat gone yellow and paint-like with a rancid smell, that part gets trimmed away hard or the whole thing goes. Bone first, clean steel, 3 places, 1 slow breath. Nutty is sound, sour goes in the ground. And I want you to know that this old bone needle is not a superstition. Federal meat inspectors used exactly this method, a trier and a nose, on hams for decades in commercial plants, because for detecting deep spoilage at the bone, it worked better than anything else available. That is the government of the United States using your great-grandfather's whittled bone. Now here is where I have got to be square with you, and this is the one place where I will side with the modern world for a minute. Your nose can tell you if something has spoiled. Your nose cannot tell you if something is dangerous. Those are 2 different questions, and nearly every American alive today has them mashed into one. Spoiled meat smells. The thing that killed those 16 loggers on the Muskegon had no smell at all. No taste, no color. It did not sour the bone, it did not soften the fat, it did not raise a bulge, and the trier would have come out of that bear haunch smelling clean as a hazelnut. The number 1 botch on this step is the shortcut everybody takes, cutting into the ham to look at it instead of triering it. You cut it open in the middle of a hot September, and now you have got 2 enormous exposed faces of moist meat in a warm room with flies in it. And if the ham is sound, you have just started it spoiling for real. Test with the steel. Cut it only when you mean to cook it. Homework this week. Buy 1 long tin metal skewer, $1 or 2, and put it in your kitchen drawer. Then start practicing the only part of this that takes real time, which is your nose. Every time you open a package of meat in your kitchen, before you cook it, stop and smell it deliberately and put a word to what you smell. Sweet, milky, metallic, nothing. You are building a library. Your great-grandmother's library had 50 years in it. Pattern break, friend. Put down whatever is in your hands. Everything I have taught you until now, everything, all 5 pieces, is the part that survived. It is in the bulletins and the extension pamphlets and the old church cookbooks. Any determined man can rebuild it in a season. What comes next is not like that. What comes next is the piece that was not lost by accident, was never really written into the folk talk in the first place, and is the reason a bear got the blame for 16 graves in Michigan. This is where the survival myth was born. This is where men died for lack of knowing. Piece 6. The heat. Come back with me to that camp on the Muskegon River, and let us go slow this time. The stove is throwing so much heat that the near side of the room is in shirt sleeves, and the far side has frost on the nail heads. Batiste has the spider skillet on, and the slabs of that smoked bear haunch are laid in, and the sound is the finest sound there is. The fat renders out clear and then goes gold. The edges brown and crisp and shrink up. The smell fills that bunkhouse, and men who have been swinging axes since dark come in and stand there without their coats off yet, just breathing it. And then he flips them, and the second side takes 3 or 4 minutes, and he plates them. And in the middle of each of those slabs, under the beautiful brown crust, under the salt and the smoke and the hickory color, there is a band of meat still cool, still faintly pink, maybe warm, maybe not even warm. 3/4 of an inch of flesh that never once in its life saw a temperature over about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And coiled in that flesh, in little cysts too small for any eye in that room to see, are the larvae of a parasitic worm called trichinella. Thousands of them, tens of thousands. A bear that has spent its life eating carrion carries them the way a dog carries fleas, and no salt cure that a logging camp ever mixed, and no smoke that ever rose out of a shack floor reliably kills them. Salt does not kill them. Smoke does not kill them. Cold does not kill them. And in the bear, it truly does not, because the strain that lives in bears and wild game up north survives freezing. 2 things kill trichinella. One is precise, prolonged commercial freezing, which does not work for bear. The other is heat. That larva dies at about 137 degrees Fahrenheit. That is all. 137 degrees, held for a moment, in every part of the meat. So Batiste's skillet killed every worm in the outer half-inch of every slab and left the middle untouched, and 30-some men swallowed them alive. The larva came out of the cysts in the gut, and that was the camp trots on day 2. They grew, they bred, and a new generation of larvae went out through the bloodstream into the muscle tissue and burrowed in, and that is the fever and the swollen eyes and the agony in the thighs and the jaw 12 days later. And that is the thing that stops a heart or a diaphragm in a heavy infection. 2 weeks of it. 16 men. And nobody in that camp had done anything unusual. They had done exactly what every good household in America did, and they had believed the sentence that every good household in America believed. If it is salty, if it is smoky, if it is brown on the outside, it is safe. It is the most dangerous sentence in American food. Here is the true one. Salt slows, smoke flavors, cold holds, heat kills. Cook it through. Every time. And here's what that means for you, in numbers you can use tonight. Fresh whole cuts of pork are safe cooked to an internal temperature of 145 degrees Fahrenheit, measured at the thickest part, followed by a 3-minute rest before you cut it. Ground pork goes to 160 degrees, because grinding spreads the surface all through the meat. Wild game, bear and wild hog especially, goes to 160 degrees, no pink, no exceptions, and I would not personally go under that with any wild animal on this continent. A home-cured country ham that has not gone through a verified commercial process is cooked meat, not ready-to-eat meat. You cook it. If you ever mean to rely on freezing instead, understand the standard. Pork cuts up to 6 inches thick must be held at 5 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 days, or minus 10 degrees for 10 days, and a great many home freezers do not truly hold those temperatures, and none of that applies to bear. I am not your food inspector, friend. I am a man with a journal. Buy an instant read thermometer. $15. $20. And know that the same catalog that sells you a $900 connected cooking rig with an application on your telephone is selling the actual life-saving device for the price of 2 sandwiches, and always was. And the reason you were never told this plainly is almost too ordinary to be angry at. When the Packers finally reckoned with trichinosis, they did not teach America the temperature. They taught America fear, and then they sold the cure for the fear. The meat board and the Packers pushed a doctrine of cooking pork gray and dead, 185 degrees, cook it till it is like a shingle, because that was a rule an ignorant public could not get wrong. And it worked, and it also made home pork taste like sawdust, which made factory ham with a label on it taste like a bargain. Then in the 1950s, the states began requiring that garbage fed to hogs be cooked, and confinement feeding took hold, and trichinosis in commercial American pork fell away to almost nothing. Today, this country sees only a handful of cases in a year, and most of them come from wild game, exactly like that bear. Then, in 2011, the United States Department of Agriculture finally lowered its own recommendation for whole cuts of pork to 145 degrees with a rest, which is what a careful cook always knew. So the truth is not that they poisoned you. The truth is that they replaced a piece of knowledge with a piece of merchandise. And knowledge is free, and merchandise is not. And if you grew up eating it the other way, hear me. My granddad ate rare middled home pork for 60 years and outlived 4 of his brothers by dumb luck and clean hogs. But dumb luck is not a preservation method. Knowing is. And that is not on you, friend. Nobody hid this from you. There just was not any money in reminding you. 90 seconds more over that fire in the middle of each of those slabs. 90 seconds. 16 men. So here's the whole thing, in order, the way Amos Wren made me say it back to him at his kitchen table until I had it clean. The cold.
Sustained weather between 28 and 40 degrees. Bleed complete. Chill to the bone overnight, below 40 before the knife. The salt. Coarse, non-iodized salt, brown sugar, measured curing salt at 1 level teaspoon per 5 pounds. Pack the bone first. 7 days per inch for bacon, 2 to 2.5 days per pound for ham. Overhaul at day 7 and day 14. Rinse. 2 weeks to equalize. The smoke. Cured meat only. Hardwood only. Never resinous wood. Under 90 degrees, days, not hours, until the rind is the color of an old fiddle. The hang. Pepper the crevices, muslin bagged tight, air on every side, dark and drafty. 90 days is young, 6 months is good, a year is a gift. The trier. Clean steel to the bone in 3 places, 1 slow breath. Nutty is sound, sour goes in the ground. And know that your nose reads spoilage, not safety. And the heat. Salt slows, smoke flavors, cold holds, heat kills. 145 degrees and a 3-minute rest for whole cuts. 160 for ground and for anything wild. Cook it through. Every time. That is the whole method. That is the skill your great-grandmother lived by and the skill 16 loggers on the Muskegon River died without. And now it is yours. This was never really about a hog or a barrel, neighbor. It was about being a person who cannot be shut off. If the trucks stop, your family eats. If the power goes, your family eats. If the price of everything doubles in 18 months, your family eats, and eats well, off a skill and a sack of salt. That is not survivalism. I am not selling you a bunker, and I am not telling you the world is ending, because I do not believe it is. That is ordinary competence that got quietly taken out of your family's hands, and you just took a piece of it back. So here is your Saturday. Do not buy a hog. Go get a 5-pound pork belly from a butcher or a warehouse store, $25 or so. Mix 1/4 cup of coarse, non-iodized salt, 1/4 cup of brown sugar, and 1 level teaspoon of curing salt number 1. Rub it all over. Put it in a bag or a covered dish in your refrigerator and turn it once a day for 7 days. Rinse it, pat it dry, let it sit uncovered in the refrigerator overnight until the surface is tacky, and then either cold smoke it under 90 degrees for a few hours or simply roast it slow to an internal temperature of 150 degrees. Slice it, fry it. You will have made better bacon in 1 week than you have ever purchased, and you will have done the cold, the salt, the smoke, and the heat with your own 2 hands. Then tell me something in the comments. Tell me how your people did it, because different regions did this very differently. The sugar cure of the Virginia and Kentucky hills, the heavy salt barrels of New England, the brine pumping along the bone in Iowa, the corncob smoke of Missouri, the lard crock method, where meat was fried down and buried in its own grease in a stone jar and kept all summer. Tell me what your grandmother called her smokehouse and what she put in the pepper. I read them all, and the story that gets the most comments is the story I go deep on next. Next time, the 2-cent lard and crock trick that carried pioneer families clear through a southern summer with no ice, no cellar, and no salt to spare.
and the decade the shortening companies made certain your grandmother forgot it. Keep the old ways they kept.